Um, and in terms of elder care, which is also a type of caregiving leave, um, there is increased or decreased use of nursing homes when there's paid leave. This was a study done in California because caregivers are more able to take care of their family members for a longer period of time. Next slide, please. And also, paid leave is good for employers, right? Because leave takers may remain attached to the labor force when they take leave because they take leave for a period of time and then come back. It reduces the risk of long-term workforce disruptions. It offers time for new parents to arrange for childcare before returning to work. It boosts morale because employees can spend longer periods of time with their employer. And especially in New Jersey, and in particular in New Jersey, accessing New Jersey family leave insurance has been shown to be related to leave takers remaining in their job, remaining in the workforce. And it's expensive to replace an employee. So if an employee is not able to take leave and they just leave their job, then an employer would have to replace that person at a much higher cost. And so it's also good for employers. Next slide, please. And then in general, paid leave is good for New Jersey itself because there's better outcomes for babies if someone takes it for bonding, for older children and older family members because their caregivers are able to care for them in the time and space that they need to. It helps to address racial and gender inequities in health, and so increases those outcomes across New Jersey. And it increases trust into the people and systems that help make leave possible and strengthens families' economic well-being across the state. Next slide, please. And so I think I'm passing it back to Yarrow.
Yes. All right. Thank you for that, Becky. I mean, these are things that we all understand to be true, but the research really does provide a lot of the evidence to make the case about the importance and benefits of paid leave that aren't just about, the individual themselves, about the whole family and the economic stability for them as well. So what is paid family leave? The law really was established so that workers could afford to take time when they need for caregiving. So we are going to first be talking about paid family leave, and this is for short FLI. I do always pause here and just remind folks that FLI is not FMLA. A lot of folks get those confused. We will try to unpack that a little bit, but FLI stands for short for Family Leave Insurance, and it is essentially the benefit program that pays folks when they take time off for caregiving. So next slide. So this is really the nitty gritty of FLI and what you can use FLI for. So the most common, widely known aspect of family leave is when somebody needs to take time to bond with a newborn. Sometimes we call it maternity leave, parental leave, paternity leave, and that's really the most commonly used aspect of family leave insurance because people know about it. And also people can prepare for that aspect of taking leave when they're expecting a child. But then we were able to expand the law to also include taking leave to cope with domestic or sexual violence. This is lesser understood because it is a newer aspect of the program. It's not only for the individuals themselves that are coping with those issues, but for those caring for them, any loved one who is there for the victim or survivor, so they can take FLI as well to cope and support individuals dealing with those situations. And then the piece that we're focusing on today is FLI to care for a loved one who is seriously ill or has been given a serious health diagnosis. So next slide. So when we say care for a loved one, we are talking about anybody who you define to be as family. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a second. But this is where you need to take care of somebody who has a physical or mental health condition, and they are close enough to be considered family. They have to have a health condition that is certified by the healthcare provider. Okay, so this can be taken in one continuous period, which I'm going to tell you the time that's available to you in a second. But you can also take it on an intermittent basis, really to suit suit the needs that you might have for taking time. I like to mention, comes up a lot, questions about if you need to take leave to travel to care for a family member who is not in New Jersey or maybe not even in the United States. And you may still qualify for benefits for that situation. Just the complication becomes getting the leave certified by the healthcare provider, because you do have to have the ability to be able to be in touch and communicate with the healthcare provider. So yeah, next slide. Let's talk a little bit about what it means when we say care for a loved one. And this was actually part of the expansion that happened a few years ago, and maybe also a lesser understood aspect of leave. So when we need to take time for anyone who we consider to be family, it's really up to us. And as I mentioned before, it's really the ability to have access to that healthcare provider that is essentially saying you have that close relationship. But the law does specifically define it as any individual with a close association equivalent of a family relationship. And then the law actually describes specific individuals, child, spouse, parents, siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, in-laws, and any blood relation, as well as chosen family. So you can see it's a pretty broad list of folks. It could also be a neighbor, though, somebody who you define to have the equivalent of a family relationship. Next slide. So eligibility. Most employees in New Jersey are covered in the family leave program. For FLI coverage, there's only a few exemptions. If you are a federal government employer and religious employer, and you do not work in New Jersey. So the place where you work does have to be in New Jersey. This could be working from home. Also, workers who are not technically employees, such as independent contractors, are also exempt. It's always something to think about, though, if you are potentially misclassified. That does happen a lot, where you should actually be classified as an employee. Next slide. So to qualify for the FLI, the Family Leave Insurance benefits, you must meet minimum gross earnings requirements. And this is in the approximately 18 months prior to the start of your claim. The amount does adjust every year. For 2024, an employee must work 20 weeks, earning at least 283 weekly, or a combined total of 14,200 in the base year. The base year is that like approximately 18 months. Technically, it is the first 4 of the last completed 5 quarters. This is like where the employer actually reports wages to the state. So that's why it depends on when you apply and what quarters have been completed. You also do have to have a valid Social Security number. And I'd like to mention here that family leave insurance is funded solely by worker payroll deductions. The employer is supposed to set up the FLI payroll contributions for all employees. And if you're unsure if they've set those up, you can check your pay stub and look for like an FLI deduction to confirm. It's not always described as FLI. That's a starting point to see if that's being deducted. If you believe that you're covered under the program, but payroll contributions are not being made, you are still encouraged to apply, as this could have been, simply an error. But mostly it does happen sort of automatically. And I do like to also mention that if a worker has become unemployed recently and has a need for family leave, they could still be eligible for benefits. And it's possible that your claim would go through a program that's called Family Leave During Unemployment. And I'm going to mention a little bit about unemployment in a second, but we can go to the next slide. And basically the weeks of leave that are available is 12 consecutive weeks. If you take this as a continuous leave all at once, or if you take it intermittently, it's 56 days or 8 weeks. Several years ago, before we expanded the program, 6 weeks was all that was available. And so that was doubled to 12 consecutive weeks, or you can see if you don't take the full 12, the reduction in the time that's available. And this is every 12-month period. This is available. Next slide. So the benefits, what you receive are 85% of your average weekly wage with a maximum weekly benefit of $1,055 for this year. This does adjust every year. And the money is sent via a money network card, but you can transfer the money to your own bank account. And I do like to mention, there are delays with claims and folks being able to get paid. This is an area that we do advocacy work. We are in touch, encouraging the Department of Labor to continue with their modernization. The administration is dedicated and they are, working to improve the claim processing system. But we understand and recognize it's a challenge and it's important to be aware of, especially for folks that need to pay bills, which is everybody. But most claims are actually being processed within several weeks, but there are still some issues with some claims definitely being delayed beyond that. Next slide. So what I just covered is family leave insurance for caregiving, right? I explained the 3 different uses for taking family leave insurance. And now I'm going to tell you just very briefly about temporary disability insurance because it is important information to be aware of, and it's related. So these benefits and eligibility are the same for FLI as I just described. So you do have to meet those minimum earnings to be eligible. There are different exemptions for temporary disability insurance that people should be aware of. If you are a county or municipal employee, your employer is not required to participate. So it's likely that you're not enrolled in this program. Also, federal employees are completely exempt as well. And this is something that is for your own health. So any physical or mental health condition that your doctor says means you cannot work, then you can apply for temporary disability insurance. This could include pregnancy, recovering from childbirth or delivery. And the benefits are available for up to $26 a year. And you do have to have the healthcare provider certify this leave as well. There are some employers that participate in a private plan where you would apply directly to that third party instead of to the state, but you can always be in touch with the state to try to determine what you might be eligible for and if you have any issues with your private plan as well. The state does oversee those plans. So that is a little bit of background on temporary disability insurance for one's own health, TDI for short, not to be confused with FLI. Okay, next slide. This is the part where I think a lot of folks do get confused, and frankly, it just is confusing. So everything I've described thus far is really about your benefits, about your cash wage replacement benefits that are available when you take leave. Job protections are separate. So we have 2 laws in New Jersey. We have FMLA and the New Jersey Family Leave Act that are available to protect your job when you're on leave. There are different qualifications for your eligibility for job protections than your paid benefit. And I'll show you a chart that kind of breaks that down in a second. But I do want to just mention that it is illegal for an employer to retaliate against an employee for taking or seeking to take their benefits, and an employee has the right to take private legal action. Next slide. So in terms of New Jersey Family Leave Act, not to be confused with family leave insurance, this is the law that protects your job for caregiving or bonding in New Jersey. And in some instances, it may be running to protect your leave at the same time that FMLA is running, but it may not, depending on what sort of leave that someone is needing to take. And this is a really good flyer. This is the Division of Civil Rights. They are the entity in New Jersey that oversees the Family Leave Act. And so this could be a really good resource for folks that need to understand more about their job protections when they are taking leave for bonding or caregiving in particular. So the next slide is a breakdown as simplified as possible, even though it's still a little complicated, of what I just sort of talked about. Around wage replacement, I described to you on the left in orange, disability or TDI for one's own health, family leave insurance or FLI to care for a loved one, or bond with a new child or cope with domestic violence, right? Those are the wage replacement programs. Those have different eligibility than the job protections, FMLA or the New Jersey Family Leave Act. And so you have to look at your eligibility for those separately. And this is an area of advocacy that we are still kind of working in because it is problematic. And it does mean a lot of folks are actually unable to take their benefits for fear of losing their job. Next slide. So this is a separate law that was passed in 2018. This requires New Jersey employers to provide 5 paid sick days a year, 40 hours. This is to all their workers, regardless of immigration status, regardless of the size of the employer. The employer can require workers earn the time for every 30 hours that they work. They can have them earn that hour at a time, or they can provide it to them up front at the beginning of the year. The time can be used for one's own health, if it's a preventative care visit, also to care for a loved one, to address issues related to domestic violence as well, and any work or school closure due to public health emergency, quarantine, vaccination, and recovery, and also for school visits. So if your school says, hey, I need you to come in to meet with us, or there's some sort of event happening, you can take the time for that for your child's school meetings. It's just a very brief primer. If folks have questions on that, we can talk about that. Next slide. Unemployment, just want to briefly mention, unemployment is, of course, this financial support when people lose their jobs or if your work hours are reduced through no fault of your own, and the benefits are available for $26 a year. It is different, though, if you're transitioning from one program to another. And when I say one program to another, I mean the programs I just talked about. So family leave insurance or temporary disability insurance. If you're going for one of those programs and then you become unemployed, you are going to go into a different sort of combined program, potentially disability during unemployment or family leave insurance during unemployment. But it sort of depends on, what is happening around your job availability. Unemployment does pay a lower rate, 60% of your average weekly wage, with the cap this year, $854, and you do need a valid Social Security number for unemployment. The eligibility for unemployment is the same what I described for temporary disability and family leave insurance. You have to work 20 weeks, earn at least 283 weekly, or combined total of 14,200 in the base year. So that's just a brief primer. There are services available, places that you can go to make appointments to get like one-on-one assistance. Not always the way we would hope it would be, but you can go to some sites in person and set up appointments, and we can get you that information if folks need that as well. So that is a ton of info that I just piled onto everybody. I hope it wasn't too much, but I want to pass it back to Becky to kind of wrap it up and give us a sense of, what folks are experiencing and what are some of the challenges as well.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks, Yarrow. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So some of the work that we do at the center is talk to people about their experiences with leave, with other kinds of policies. And so one of the things we wanted to show you are some quotes from some people that we've interviewed, talking about what it's like for them to take paid leave. Somebody said if it was unpaid, it wouldn't have been good. This person's husband had been out of work because of COVID, and it wouldn't have been easy. These interviews were done a couple of years ago. They said they would have had to cut back on a lot of basic necessities without that wage replacement. And this person who had a baby said that they wouldn't have been able to stay home if they did not have access to that wage replacement. And then this other person said, their bills wouldn't have gotten paid. They wouldn't have been able to access basic needs. We did hear from people, especially after there was a change in the law where, it went from 66% wage replacement to 85% wage replacement. And that additional wage replacement really made it so that families could pay for their bills, even at 85% wage replacement. They kind of could figure out how to save in a way that they could not at 66% wage replacement. Next slide, please. But there were some barriers, and there are some common barriers that people tell us, and people tell surveys about the barriers that they face when taking leave. Next slide, please. So one of the barriers, and one of the things we're trying to accomplish with presentations like this, is that people just are unaware of the availability of New Jersey family leave insurance. So only about half of workers that were surveyed were aware of NJFLI at all. And the lowest income respondents were the least likely to know about it at about 40%. Nearly 60% of workers were unsure whether they qualified at all. And many employees report confusion between the types of leave, intermittent versus continuous, and also in higher number don't know about caregiving leave, right? They think of family leave as potentially maternity leave. Maybe they understand the other parent or parental leave for both parents, but they might not think that they have access to leave for caregiving, which they do. And then additionally, more than half of eligible workers just don't use their FLI benefits because they fear job loss, loss of seniority, or potential job advancement. So this is a fear that people have, even if they have access to job protection, even if their employer is not allowed to retaliate against them, they're still fearful that there will be repercussions to them taking leave. Next slide, please. Additionally, FLI is underused, particularly by those most likely to need it. So in 2022, approximately 4 million New Jersey workers were covered by FLI, but only 53,000 around eligible claims were filed. And so there probably weren't 4 million people who needed to take leave, but I'm sure there was more than 53,000 who needed to take leave. So somewhere in the middle there were people who probably needed to take leave, but chose not to take it for any number of reasons. The highest number of claims were by those who have a higher level of education. Over 50% of the claimants were white, 17% Hispanic or Latino, and 14% Black. And 3/4 of the claims were by women. And so we still are experiencing that idea that women are the caregivers and they're the ones using the leave, even though this leave is gender neutral. Anyone can take the leave. Next slide, please. And we just see that there continues to be stigma around leave. One of the quotes we heard is that, employers may say to you, like, we care about your mental health, we care about your well-being, we have wellness programs like yoga, you could go to yoga on your lunch hour and go to your 30-minute class, but we don't want you to take time off for your dad's heart attack, right? So this sort of workplace culture of promoting wellness, but maybe not going so far as supporting people as caregivers is felt by workers. Next slide, please. And so, as people who might be working with employees who need leave for caregiving, who might be curious about it, who might not understand it, these presentations, these trainings are good to understand how you can help people. Next slide, please. So one thing we heard from someone who we term an intermediary, so this is a person who might be the middle person between someone who might need to take leave and an employer, or someone who might need to take leave and the state who's administering the leave. This person said people aren't using Google to find information about leave. They hear it from their friends and colleagues. So getting the word out is crucial so people like employers can proactively have conversations with potential leave takers. And this is actually true in the research as well. People look to intermediaries, to social workers, to nurses, to hospice care workers to understand what's available to them to care for their loved ones in the way that they want to. And so it's really important for those who are working with family members to understand the access to leave. Next slide. And I think that's it for us. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So thank you, Yarrow and Becky. And we are going to get into the Q&A, but before we do get into the Q&A, I actually want to launch our second poll and to see how folks feel about your understanding of paid leave in New Jersey now after this training. So yeah, we could go into the Q&A as folks are answering that. So please feel free to raise your hand and come off mute to ask your question. And we will also be taking a look at what is in the chat.
I have a question. Are
Yeah.
you allowed to take family leave twice a year? Or it all depends on the situation?
So, hi, Carmen.
Hi, how are you?
You have the 12 weeks available to you, both under the Family Leave Act for job protection and family leave insurance. However, if you take it on an intermittent basis, which is anything less than the 12 consecutive weeks, then you might not have those full 12 weeks available to you. But you could absolutely take it at different points in the year, if that makes sense. Does that help your question?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm just going to read the question in the chat, which is, again, very common confusion between FLI and FMLA. Is one just job protection and the other the way you get paid? And yeah, Heather, basically, yeah. So FLI, or family leave insurance, is in fact that cash benefit program that provides you with 85% of your wages, where you have to have earned the $14,200 in that base year period to be eligible, that you apply to the state. That is one thing I think we didn't really emphasize, but you generally apply to the Department of Labor, to the state. It is in our resource slide, myleavebenefits.nj.gov, for those benefits. You do have to communicate with your employer, of course, about your need to take leave. FMLA, or the Family Leave Act. So FMLA is federal, and it covers both your own health as well as caring for a loved one. And the New Jersey Family Leave Act, or FLA for short, just covers your job when you're taking leave for bonding or for caregiving, not for your own health. So they kind of will work differently depending on what you're taking leave for. But it's possible that both of those job protection laws are going to protect you. But for those programs, and we didn't go into detail because it is so confusing, you do have to work at your job for a year. You have to have a minimum for the FLA, 30 employees. And for FMLA, it's 50 employees. And then you have to also work a certain number of hours. For FLA, it's 1,000. For FMLA, it's 1,250. Did I get that right? Okay. And that is where your employer is required to keep your job or give you a similar job upon your return. It's not really a program that you apply to, although sometimes your employer may provide you with paperwork that you have to complete. But that is the job protection. I hope that's helpful, and I'm sorry if that only confused you more. Should we go to Melissa, who has
Yeah,
her
let's do
hand
that.
up?
Hi, good morning. My name's Melissa. I'm an oncology social worker, and I sometimes encounter caregivers who want to take FLI, but they don't technically qualify for FMLA because they work for an employer that's like less than the requirement, I think like less than 30 employees. So I've encouraged them to still try to apply for FLI anyway, but I don't know if that's the right guidance.
I think it's great guidance.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So that's why I'm just sort of, that's one question, like, should they still be applying for FLI, even if they technically don't qualify for FMLA?
Yes, and I think this is sort of the sticky situation for a lot of folks that are not eligible for the job protection piece. But it's very possible that that employer is, understanding and willing to have them take the time and return to their job without any issues. But it does then become a negotiation essentially on the part of the worker in a different way than if they were job protected. It is important to remember that at least 5 days you have under the earned sick leave law, meaning that they can't, regardless of the employer size, if you're under that law, they cannot deny you that time off at the very minimum.
Okay.
If there's other things that I have forgotten to mention, anyone feel free to chime in. But I would actually encourage folks here today that run into people who are in that situation that want to make a difference and share their story. I'm going to pop the link in there in the chat. This is basically, folks can reach out. This is a way to say, hey, you're impacted by this issue, this barrier around job protection, and you can share your story and make a difference. We are in the process of doing that work to change these laws to reduce the barrier around people being able to take their time they're entitled to because they are paying for this program, right? They're contributing to the program, but the job protection issue prevents them from being able to do that.
Okay.
Before we go to sorry, do you have another question?
I was going to ask one other thing. I've also encountered sometimes like caregivers who are self-employed. And what I usually tell them is like you have to like see if you paid into the system, like paid the tax, like when you filed your taxes with your accountant. Also, don't know if that's the right answer. And I usually do tell them to call the state, but I guess I'm just sort of wondering like what have you encountered with people who are self-employed and what it doesn't seem like they're entitled to much, but I'm not sure if that's accurate or not.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue is if they might be considered a New York self-employed individual. I had someone the other day who was in that situation. Because New York, I believe, does have a self-employed opt-in into their program. They also do have a paid family leave program. New Jersey does not have a self-employed opt-in. Your
Okay.
advice is correct. Sometimes sole proprietors or individuals can kind of set it up so that they are paying payroll taxes, that they are employees of their business rather than independent contractors are just not employees. So that is the important thing, is you do have to be an employee. So
Okay.
you're doing a great job.
Thank you. This is helpful. Thank you.
And I'll also pop my referral link. If honestly, you do not need to refer folks. You're doing an amazing job. But if someone has a more complicated situation, you can always refer them to us for a one-on-one.
And I just saw one question in the chat that I can answer quickly before we go to the next hand raise, which is there's no employee limit for the wage replacement, NJFLI. The employee limit is for the job protection. So the New Jersey Family Leave Act is the 30 or more employees, and the federal FMLA is 50 or more employees. So for the wage replacement, though, there's no employee limit. So do we want to go to the next hand raise? I think Marianella.
Hi, how are you all? Sorry, I joined later. I had some trouble with the computer, like doing a lot of updating, I guess. I work in sales with these laws, with a grant from the DOL, of course. And I wanted to ask, because what I've learned, and yeah, through study, is that there could be a law passing that it could allow us to 10 people in companies that might pass in New Jersey.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. That there might be a law passing to change the number of employees.
To reduce
dealing with protection, dealing with job protection.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're working on.
Oh, yeah. So do you have information in an
Absolutely.
update?
Get in touch with us. You're going to get an email from myself or Nat, and we do this in the beginning. You might have missed it.
Yeah, sorry.
It's totally fine. We're gonna, this is a wonderful question, because this is actually the core of our work, really.
Yeah, I know,
Outreach and education is important, understanding the laws, but what good is passing a law if people don't, know about it and able to access it? And job protection is a huge barrier. And we are really focused on this. And we need folks that are willing and able to, testify, share their stories, explain the issues and barriers around job protection and how it prevents people from being able to take their time. So absolutely. We will pop a few things in the chat and follow up, but we are actually right now in the process of trying to advocate for the threshold be lowered to at least 5 or, thereabouts. It's a negotiation. Politics always is complicated, but thank you for your question.
And then the other one is that I also read that there's a third protection law that could be dealing with 25 employees. I don't know if it's
Safe Act. Right.
Safe Act.
So that's only for a month. Am I misspeaking? And it's specifically for when somebody is taking leave to cope with issues related to domestic violence. So yes, that could be something that is a little bit helpful, but the number of employees is still a barrier, and the time frame is obviously reduced from FMLA or the Family Leave Act, which is 12 weeks. They're both 12 weeks, right? So the SAFE Act is much less amount of time. We can definitely get you information about the SAFE Act as well.
What you mean is that he'll have, I mean, the employee will have only
It's
1 month.
It's 20 days, not even a month. It's 20 days in a 12-month period, the SAFE Act.
To return.
No, it's
Oh.
just that's the only amount of, yes, essentially that's the amount of time where your job is protected, locked in, unless, you know, you have another extenuating circumstance that would qualify you for job protection under FMLA. But again, it's a question of how large is that employer? Do they qualify because their employer's on the smaller side or not?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your questions. These are great things to bring up.
Thank you. You do a wonderful job. Thank you.
No, you too. It takes all of us, right? So I see some questions in the chat. I see also folks answering in the chat. Could folks who feel like their question hasn't been answered just come off mute and ask it? I'm not sure. Let's see. Have we gotten to all of them?
Yeah, I think we got to all of them. There might have been, let me see.
Just to emphasize, Rayshawn, if that's how you say your name, I can answer your question, but do you request family leave through the employer, or do you have to go to the state? You know, typically family leave insurance is through the state. You do, of course, inform your employer when you're planning on taking that leave. You would apply to the state, myleavebenefits.nj.gov. What Danica said, you can do it online. Your employer doesn't really have a role in filling out any of the paperwork any longer. They used to, they don't any longer. Disability, temporary disability, it's more common that you may be applying to a third-party entity, a private plan rather than the state, but you can always go to the state's website, myleavebenefits.nj.gov, to learn more and to apply. Okay, we're actually coming up on our time for Q&A, but I do see that you put in a leave of absence through our employer, but complete the forms through the state directly. That's right, right? That sounds right, everyone, right? Okay, yeah, that's right. Because essentially, what you have to think about is your leave of absence or your request for time off is about essentially your job protection, saying that you've notified your employer, that they've approved it, and so that's like more around that piece. And then your benefit. There are some details in the law about informing your employer, letting them know, but generally it's through the state and you don't have to go through your employer through that. It used to be that the employer did help fill out forms, but it created a lot of delays. So they found an alternative way to collect your wage information through the wages that are reported directly to the state, and they don't have to go through the employer. There are some instances where they need information from an employer, and the Department of Labor does inform the employer when you have applied for your paid leave, for your benefits. Okay, that it. Any other burning questions before we move on? I do want to move on to our next section because I'm really excited for our guest speakers. I'm going to turn it back to you, Nat, to turn it back to.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for participating and for sharing your questions. I hope that was helpful. But I'm actually going to share, before we start the panel, I'm going to share the results of the second poll. So that was, how familiar are you with paid leave in New Jersey now? And we have almost half people saying they feel now very familiar with paid leave New Jersey. Almost about half of the people saying they're somewhat familiar. No people saying that they still feel unfamiliar. So that's good. And 3 people compared to 1 people before that say that they feel almost like an expert. So super exciting. So yeah, I am super excited about this panel. I am going to actually welcome my colleague, Danica LaFortune, who is going to be kicking off today's panel presentation. So welcome, Danica.
Thank you so much, Nat. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yarrow and Becky, for sharing all that information with us. I am glad we have a few more experts on the call now. But as a reminder, we don't expect you to know everything, but you guys are already doing a great job in sharing the information that you already know. And now you have a little bit more to your toolbox. So just if you only remember the website for all of these protections, that would be great. But again, I am Danica LaFortune. I am with SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. I am actually a paid leave ambassador. I'm also a project coordinator there. I am also a community health worker, and I am also a community doula. I'm also a mother and an employee, right? So I am very passionate about paid leave because not only as a community health worker and in a community doula, I was able to share this information out to expected families. But I am also an employee in New Jersey, and I was able to use this leave for myself when I had my daughter in 2020. I was actually eligible for my son that I had in 2011. But didn't even know. I didn't even know this existed. So I was not able to take advantage of this benefit that we have. So I firsthand have seen some changes that have already been happening in our state. Of course, we know we're not there yet, but some things have moved. Some things have changed and increased from the benefit rate from 65% to 85%, right? And the rate increases. So some things are happening, but there's still some work to do. So I'm very excited to be here today. Like Nat said, just to see what our panel will share with us today. Like I said, I'm a doula and a community health worker, so I am often kind of able to prepare expected families about what's to come, about how and when they should apply, about, how much time they can get. But we're going to talk today more about those situations that happen unexpectedly, right? Those times when we have to become the caregivers when we were not planning for it. We didn't have that in the plan. We don't have our list of things to do now that this happened because it's so unexpected, right? So knowing that we do have a benefit in our state for caregivers who have to take the time to care for a family member or a loved one with an unexpected diagnosis, possibly, aging parents with a diagnosis that can be detrimental, or children with diagnosis of diabetes, right? We see that unfortunately rising, or multiple sclerosis, or anything detrimental that, again, can happen unexpectedly. So without further ado, let's get started. And I see we do have, okay, good. I'm looking at the slides now. So I'm going to ask our wonderful panel here, which you just saw their names on the screen, to just please introduce yourself and let us know what your organization does and how you see the value of paid leave from your organizations and your community or client's perspective. And we're going to start it off with Kathy. So please also introduce yourself first and then share with us.
Sure. Kathy Rowe. I'm sorry, I don't have much of a voice, but Executive Director of New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well. And I want to thank Becky and Yarrow for speaking at our conference 2 weeks ago on the importance of family leave. As New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well, we are very interested in supporting caregivers as our state ages. We see more and more, not only more people older, but they're living longer and they need more supports and they need more help. And I think you really picked on something important, is the unexpected. I know from my own personal experience too, with my aging mother with Alzheimer's, things happen and we need to be prepared. And what we see over and over, the caregivers, it's usually the daughter-in-law, is a woman who gives up work to be caregiver. As she ages, that sets up her future and her financial stability when she ages by giving up wages, benefits, Social Security income. It all ties together. So we really feel that it's important to let people know as they are caring for aging parents, this is important. This is a job. And you need to look for your own financial security. It's like that saying on the airplane, put on your own life vest first. You need to take care of yourself, your well-being, your financial security when you're going to be a caregiver for an aging person. And I'll save my voice for the questions.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Kathy. Let's hear from Melissa and then Sarah.
Hi, good morning. First off, I just want to thank New Jersey Citizen Action for the invitation to be here today, and have to give a shout out to Mary Stabile, who's a New Jersey advocate and a longtime ambassador of NPAF, or National Patient Advocate Foundation, for connecting us here. So my name's Melissa Williams, and I am the Director of Grassroots Advocacy and Community Partnerships at National Patient Advocate Foundation. And we are focused on amplifying the voices of patients and the larger patient community to really improve how we all experience healthcare. We're the advocacy affiliate of Patient Advocate Foundation, which is a national charity whose mission is to directly assist patients with any barriers that they may be experiencing as it relates to costs and insurance issues more specifically. So by and large, we at NPAF take what we learn from the patients who have been assisted by Patient Advocate Foundation, as well as the broader community, including groups like New Jersey Citizen Action, and we advocate for policies that work first and foremost for patients and their families. So to answer the second part of that question, in terms of the value of paid leave to our organization, our community, the value is huge. Paid family leave is huge. I think when someone is diagnosed with a chronic condition, there are always implications on affordability and costs, like whether they're for the individual or for the family. They will likely have to take time off work. I think Kathy really hit on some of those things there. A loved one may have to take time off work. And if they can't afford their healthcare, then they likely can't afford other things, right? Like their utilities or food, mortgage. We've heard stories of patients who've had to dip into their children's college savings because of because of their own health, and we get that. Patient Advocate Foundation recently published their annual impact report, where they report that 42% of the patients who contacted the organization was due to financial cost of living issues. And so all to say that just really underscored the importance of paid family leave, and also what you all are doing here, raising awareness and making sure people know that these benefits and programs exist.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing, Melissa. Thank you. And last but not least, we're going to hand it over to Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Heimowitz. I am an attorney with Legal Services of New Jersey, more specifically with the Workers' Legal Rights Project of Legal Services of New Jersey. Thank you so much for having me today. This is such an important topic, and it's great to come together with other advocates to talk about it. In terms of the work we do here at Legal Services, we offer advice and sometimes representation in civil legal matters. So we're advising on non-criminal legal issues. So I'm with the Workers' Legal Rights Project. We give advice and often or sometimes representation in any issue that touches on employment or unemployment. So lots of unemployment advice and representation and appeals. And then same with issues on the employment side, problems at work, wrongful terminations, family or leave of absence issues, whistleblowing, discrimination, anything that relates to work. We represent low-income clients, so in order to be eligible for our services, a person has to be under 300% of the federal poverty level. That takes into consideration many factors, family size, assets. So I can't tell you exactly what that translates into in terms of numbers, but we are representing people who wouldn't likely otherwise be able to afford legal advice. In our program, we also represent a lot of undocumented workers. We do a lot of wage and hour work, meaning representing people who haven't been paid their wages properly, wages, overtime, sometimes retaliation. So we do a lot of that type of work. We get calls through our hotline, and then we get referrals from a lot of grassroots organizations as well. In terms of paid family leave, or FLI, I think the value is enormous. It fills a huge gap in the state government's safety net when people are suffering from an unanticipated life event, like losing one, having someone become ill, losing one's job. The government provides various types of safety nets, but and traditionally, someone, most often women, who have to leave their jobs to care for an ill relative, child, parent, relative, would have to leave their job and wouldn't be eligible for unemployment benefits, because our unemployment law specifically says that leaving a job to care for someone is considered a voluntary quit. And a voluntary quit, and there's always exceptions, I should say that, but a voluntary quit generally disqualifies someone from benefits altogether. So before paid family leave existed, we saw a lot of people unable to access anything, unemployment, any type of support during these times of crisis. And it was most often women who are leaving their jobs to care for a child, a parent, a relative. So this fills a huge gap. We actually don't see too many cases of involving paid family leave. And that's because in paid family leave, if it's a pretty straightforward calculation. You either have the minimum earning requirements, you've either met the minimum earnings requirements, or you haven't, and you either have the certification from a medical provider or you don't. And so unlike unemployment, where it can be a very adversarial process, lots of disputes about the terms of the separation from work, that doesn't really exist in paid family leave. You either qualify or you don't. And that's somewhat similar to temporary disability. And one nice thing we've found about temporary disability is if someone submits an application and the dates are wrong. So the claimant is the workers writing that they became disabled on January 1st, but the doctor wrote that they actually became disabled on January 10th. That's a problem that has to be fixed, but the agency gives flexibility, allows you to go back and get a new certification. Sometimes in the world of unemployment, there's not that flexibility. So I think temporary disability and paid family leave are really good in that respect, that the agency wants people to access these benefits when they need them. So we haven't seen too many problems. I haven't seen appeals of a denial of paid family leave, which is nice. Some of that is because people don't know so much about it, but also because theoretically, if you qualify, you should be getting your benefits. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
If you qualify, you should be getting your benefits, right? Thank you so much for sharing all of that wonderful information, Sarah. So we're going to get into our next question. What challenges or barriers do those facing a disease diagnosis experience in trying to manage their health and work and financial security? And I know your voices, and I thank you for being here, Kathy. I know your voice is a little, but I would love to start with you because you kind of started to go there, right?
Yeah.
So again, what challenges or barriers do those facing a disease diagnosis experience in trying to manage their own health and work and financial security?
I think one of the challenges is self-care. And when we're put in any medical emergency, you know, the adrenaline goes up. We focus on the crisis and we don't focus on the long term. What happens a lot when caring for older adults or people who have a parent with an issue, they don't understand their benefits. And one of the things that we say over and over to people is have a plan. Take some time to have a plan. People assume that Medicare covers things. It does not. And if you are even fortunate enough to be able to pay for home health aid for someone, like let's say a discharge from a hospital, it is one, very expensive. In New Jersey, it's through an agency, it starts at $30 an hour. And if you can find someone, there's a worker shortage. So there are multiple barriers there. So people have to really plan ahead and think, how do I take care of myself? How will I get through this? And people I don't think they have an exit plan, so that this is my situation now. How will it end? Will it end with my parents needing a permanent aid? Will it end with me going back to work full time? Will it end with a change in their living situation? So part of that self-care is being realistic and planning upfront, and it might be a moving target, but having some sense of what the exit strategy is or what your long-term situation is going to be so you can be the most prepared.
I like that a lot. And I put that in the chat. What's the exit plan? Because I don't think, because a lot of times, like you said, we're running on that adrenaline. We just know these are the things we have to do, has to be done now because you're sick right now and the bill is right now. But I love the idea of being more prepared, right? Like what is this going to look like further down the road? What is the exit plan? Thank you, Kathy. I love that. Melissa, what are some barriers that you're seeing or you feel?
Ooh, so that's quite the question, right? And I also just want to emphasize or echo what Kathy said. I love that idea of really emphasizing self-care and what we've called it over at our organization is having a care plan, kind of taking the advanced care plan out of it so it doesn't feel so heavy, but just planning for the unexpected. And so we have some resources on our website that really speak to that. But I think what I really want to lift up here in terms of like the biggest challenge or barrier that we see patients and their families facing is it really goes back to not knowing that these programs exist and they have to learn on the fly. It's there. And again, it goes back to not knowing or not having that plan. And I know I'm experiencing it now, even with like, caring for my own mom, who is just, has a chronic condition and is managing things in the way that she feels is just, the next day to the next day to the next day. But I'm thinking longer term for all of us. And it's just, we have to have those kinds of conversations, and they're tough. But by and large, people do not know about these programs. And it's, it's great that states like New Jersey and other states who have passed paid family leave programs or just other safety net programs that are out there. It's really great that they have made those available, but what good are they if people don't know how to find them or how to access them? And so we think that there is more that can be done in terms of hospitals and health systems and employers raising awareness about these programs. And even more so, we think that there is a lot that can be done to really bring the workforce together and really bring up what we call needs navigators, people who focus on addressing social needs as a critical part of that, as a critical part of the healthcare system, because we think people really need people to find these programs. Like I think you guys already spoke to it, like going on Google and looking for these programs is not enough. And there's just so much overwhelming information. We hear from advocates all the time, like, we don't even know where to begin to like parse out this information. It's so overwhelming. And so having a navigator to really screen someone for what their needs might be, but also address them in a way that's like, okay, well, here's the program that we think that might work best for you. And not only processing the eligibility component, but like taking them through it. And what I said it already, but what we call that at our organization is needs navigation. And we advocate for scaling needs navigation programs. And these are programs that provide that hands-on support for patients and caregivers to find and use resources that really address their essential needs. But it's a big question that you ask, and it is, this is just one barrier, right? And I wanted to just lift up this point, so thank you.
Yes, we understand it was a loaded question. Understand, but I agree with a lot of what you said. And Kathy, I agree with your comment in the chat, because we as doulas, we say it all the time too, like, why are they not getting this information or receiving this information from their provider or at their provider's location or at the clinic or at the hospital? Like, why does no one know there, that this is an option for them? So I completely agree. We definitely have to do more to get the word out and the understanding of what it all means, right? Because our biggest barrier also that we've been hearing of, so FMLA, I want money. Okay, but I need my job, right? So even understanding the difference, and then unfortunately understanding that they might have to choose one over the other.
Mm-hmm.
I might need my job more than I can worry about this pay right now, if we're thinking about long term. So more barriers. Thank you for sharing so far. Sarah, I'd love to hear what you
just
have.
jump in there.
Yes,
One of
surely.
I know a great geriatrician who said he recognizes that when he has an older adult patient, he has two patients in the room, the patient and the caregiver. And think of how often, like I escort my mother to all of her doctor's appointments. I am also that doctor's patient, and I am the one communicating. And that is something that we're going to be working more on, to lift up age-friendly health systems, but recognizing the caregivers in the room too, and an important part of that care plan. The other thing that we just learned from a survey we did of older adults is doctors are the most trusted source of information. So we do need to get that information to the doctor's office, even if it's a flyer on the bulletin board in the waiting room where people will see it. But that's where people, and I agree, compared to the internet or Googling, they should be a trusted source of information. But if they don't have the information, it's not going to get shared.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. Sarah.
Okay. I certainly agree with everything that the other panelists have said. It's completely overwhelming to face an unexpected diagnosis or to have a loved one be in an accident, have an injury. So it's really overwhelming. And then I'll add the workers' rights perspective on top of having to navigate a very serious situation with a medical diagnosis. And you also have to think about your job. And that's another layer of being completely overwhelmed. And it's really difficult to navigate everything. And I think everyone needs an advocate, medical patients for sure. And even from my own experience years ago, I had an unexpected serious diagnosis, and I was dealing with that. And I was a workers' rights advocate back then too. Never occurred to me to apply for temporary disability until a family friend said, why don't you do that? I just couldn't think straight at that time. So it's so important to have avenues of assistance. And negotiating with an employer about a leave of absence on top of a serious diagnosis is just so difficult. But what I would say is that there are organizations like yours out there to help people, because it's a lot to navigate. There are organizations like the Job Accommodation Network. Their website is askjan.org, and they help people come up with requests for reasonable accommodations. And so if you have a particular diagnosis, they might be able to tell people what people with those types of symptoms have requested at work to allow them to continue working. things like that. You know, people call us all the time with questions about what they're entitled to, the NJFLA versus the FMLA. Yeah, it's very confusing, hard to keep straight, and what is job protection and what is wage replacement. It's a lot. No one's expected to remember all of that. But there are organizations who are expected to be able to explain that, like ours. So it's important to have that network available so that people can reach out and get the information they need, but also from the employer. You know, when someone goes to their employer and says, I'm faced with this very serious situation, someone in HR or dealing with personnel should be able to say with confidence and accuracy what they're entitled to, what their options are. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that what we've spoken about today are the minimum requirements that an employer has to offer under state and federal law. But employers can always be more generous if they choose to be. So just like that FMLA requires that for people who meet certain criteria are given 12 weeks of protected leave. An employer can certainly be more generous and say, oh, your doctor says you should be out for 6 months, no problem. So just because these are minimum requirements doesn't mean that it's out of the question to ask for more. And particularly if someone in a similar job as yours had a similar situation and was given 8 months off to recover or to care for a relative, then if the employer isn't consistent with that in allowing similarly situated employees to take similar time off, that raises questions of discrimination. But I'd say, yeah, it's completely overwhelming for workers, especially to face unanticipated situations like health crises, and navigating employment in those situations is difficult. So I guess I would encourage people to reach out to the organizations that exist to help people in these situations and get the information that they need. And I think the Department of Labor has done a pretty good job with giving access on their website to people about what programs might be available. It's a good starting point, at least. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And I like that point that you said about HR. I agree that employees should be able to confidently go to their HR, and the HR department should confidently be able to, let the employee know what is available and what you're eligible for. And that's not happening. But I agree that that's another piece that HR department should know in our state, the things that their employees are eligible for. And Sarah, thank you for sharing, a little bit of your story about how you didn't take temporary disability when you could have, right? Because I faced with the same thing last year now. Yeah, I had to have an eye surgery. And I did not know until the last minute that, there's downtime? Oh, weeks. Oh, didn't even know until about a week before I was actually scheduled to have the surgery. And luckily, I know Yarrow, right? Like I know people, like I do this stuff, but I still have my own questions. So I had somebody to reach out to kind of clarify some things like, okay, what do I do here again? But what about the people who don't have a Yarrow, that don't have someone, right? What about them? So this is where the gaps are taking place when we say they don't know what's going on. That their New Jerseyans don't know what really is going on in our state and what benefits are available. So I thank you all for kind of highlighting that. I think we're going to wrap up we're kind of good with time, right? Right here, Yarrow, Nat?
Yeah, we're looking good. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Thank you,
I
Dana.
do see a hand.
You have
I
6
saw a
minutes
hand.
to wrap up the panel if folks want to do the last.
Okay. And I did see a hand. Gloria, you had a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, thank you so much. So my name is Annie Lopez. I'm a community health associate for Atlantic Health System. I really respect Mrs. Sarah comment about the Department of Labor, but based on my experience with my patients, I have a lot of patients that apply for um, the short-term disability, as well as unemployment. They have months applying for those benefits. When they call, nobody answer. They email, they don't get a response back. So they feel helpless because we even don't know how to help them. We we email, and there is no help for these patients. So there is someone knows any other plan in order to help these patients to get in contact with these agencies?
Yes, and what I was suggesting is that the website for the Department of Labor is a good starting point to access information, but you're absolutely right. When someone encounters a problem, maybe they've certified incorrectly, answered one question mistakenly in an unemployment weekly certification, fixing that is incredibly difficult. We have in New Jersey, a great new unemployment application that's online. But if you run into trouble with that and answer the question incorrectly, trying to fix that can be a disaster. And even despite all of the unemployment modernization efforts that we're undertaking in New Jersey and at a national level, that doesn't necessarily translate into someone answering the phone when a claimant calls for help. I don't have any great phone numbers to give, but I would certainly say call us, because we do help people every single day in those situations who aren't able to access their benefits for whatever reason, and then can't get through to anyone. Yeah, and I see Yarrow just wrote a comment about that the delays for disability can often be the care provider certification. And one thing that I think is not available on the website for the Department of Labor is that if you have to rely on, for temporary disability, you no longer have to get the employer certification, but there are processes to submit information in different ways than the application requires. We're always happy to help with things like that. So if you have people that are getting stuck, you can always refer to us. Care provider certifications, yeah, we sometimes have to call doctors and give them a little encouragement, because you're absolutely right. You're not going to get anywhere without that certification. And we find that sometimes medical offices say, oh, as a policy, we don't complete those forms or something like that. But always feel free to refer people to us, because it's what we do day in and day out.
Thank you so much for your feedback. Have a good one.
Just chime in really briefly, Gloria. The other thing, yes, refer wherever you think is most helpful, legal services. We also take referrals. Also, elected officials can be helpful. I don't always recommend that because they're not always helpful. That is a possibility. They can sort of help escalate a situation where somebody is in dire straits because their benefits are not being processed quickly. But I'll turn it back to Danica to wrap up the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that, Gloria, for even bringing that to this panel, because these are real barriers, and you're not alone, and your families are not alone in their frustration. And again, this just lets us know there's still a lot of work to be done. Kathy and Melissa, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you for being a resource for us, right? Thank you. Kathy and Melissa, if there's anything else you want to kind of just share with us before we end, before we actually hand it back to Nat, please share. And thank you for being here.
Just thank you again for the invitation to be here. I will drop the contact information or the websites for my organization in case anybody would like to follow up. But thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And I am going to share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay. All right, so can everyone see my screen over here? Okay, cool. So yeah, we're gonna wrap up. Just some questions to consider after this discussion that we just had and listening to the panel. What else do you think can be done collaboratively to enhance a culture of change in New Jersey and increase NJFLI understanding, uptake, and support? And do you feel like you have enough information to steer people to information about paid leave? What else would be helpful? You could always feel free to reach out to us after this as well if you do have any like suggestions as to what can be included in future trainings. So we make sure that we are getting people all the information that they need. And so, yeah, we are also seeking to make sure that New Jersey is a place where all working families can take time to care for their loved ones and themselves during moments that matter the most. So if you're really passionate about identifying, connecting with groups, sharing education, tool, resources, having those discussions. If you're interested in partnering with the Time to Care Coalition to advocate for and promote New Jersey's paid leave options. And if you're passionate about providing simple, clear educational materials for social workers to use and other intermediaries that those materials could help inform who could use those benefits, you could take a look at these links listed below. They will be dropped in the chat as well. We have a link that has some of our trainings on there, as well as more information about the New Jersey Time to Care Coalition's fight. And so finally, yeah, we want to emphasize really sharing educational resources. You'll see on the next slide, we have an example of some of our materials, but educating is really, really important. Workers use benefits of a program that they're not aware of, that they're not aware that it exists, and they don't really know how to take advantage of a program if they're not even aware that it exists or how it works. There's just a lot of confusion. So education and informing is definitely vital. And we have a Facebook group actually that if any of you would like to join, we'll drop that link in the chat where you could just share any questions or concerns. We have like a few hundred people, or Yara, correct me for a few hundred or thousand. I'm not sure which one it is, but there's still a lot of people in there. And so there's a lot of people to talk to, a lot of people to help. Encourage families to visit the state's website, which includes helpful resources. We dropped that in the chat a few times, myleavebenefits.nj.gov. That's where you could find like a lot of information on each individual program. And we also take referrals. So if you go to njtimetocare.com/get-support, you could actually you could sign up for a one-on-one with Yarrow, and we are also offering free trainings and presentations to anyone who is interested in that. But this is just an example of what our materials look like. You could find more of this on our New Jersey Time to Care website. And yeah, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to stick on for a few minutes. And if anything comes up later on, feel free to email any one of us. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our facilitators and to my panelists and colleagues for everything. Yeah, I think we are closing out now. So yeah, and definitely feel free to stay on if you have a